Welcome to the Jumping Bean Magic Collective podcast. I'm Linda Lewis, founder of the collective, here with my co-host, Heather Manwaring. We started this podcast to dive deep into the creative experience. We explore themes related to the creative path and showcase other creators' journeys. If you want to know more about the collective and our mission of connecting creatives with meaningful work, please check out our website and follow us on Instagram. We'd love to connect with you. Hello, welcome back to the Jumping Bean Magic Collective podcast. I am the founder of Jumping Bean Magic Collective, Linda Lewis. I am here with our special guest, Meredith Vlahakis, and she is an architect out of Vancouver, Washington, and with my co-host,
Heather Manwaring, artist, photographer, coach.
So tonight's episode, we are going to talk to Meredith a little bit about her creative journey. And then our topic of conversation for our discussion is going to be around developing a personal style. And I think this is a big topic for a lot of artists and creatives. And we'll get pretty deep into how the three of us have all approached developing a style or not, and what those challenges and kind of blocks are that we come up against when that topic comes up. So first off, I just want to welcome Meredith.
Thank you.
We're excited to have you here. I would really like to know kind of what your creative influences were as a child. And I think a lot of us are really influenced, of course, by the place that we grew up and obviously our caregivers and our environment. But what were your kind of first creative influences and what mediums were you playing with as a child?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, I grew up in a pretty small town, so it wasn't like a, architectural mecca. So I can't say that I was like into architecture as a child because I kind of grew up in this bejeweled city, but I really I always liked kind of walking around the neighborhood, and I would be fascinated by certain houses, and my sister and I would like do these kind of dream floor plans. And I mean, I'm sure everybody does that as a kid, right? You get out like your notebook paper and you like write with your ballpoint pen, like have your swimming pool in your closet or whatever. And so I think some of the places I went to, like I was fortunate to be able to travel a lot with my family. We would go hiking, growing up in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of really pretty places. And so there was a lot of nature that I was exposed to. And just by proxy, just going to these different places. And of course, you get exposed to a lot of different towns and cultures. So I was kind of like a little sponge absorbing all that as a child. And this is probably less inspiring, but definitely as a kid of the 80s, I mean, there was a lot of media consumption and, cartoons, movies, whatever, that definitely was, I'm sure, a part of what influenced, kind of visually what I thought was cool or exciting. And, um, I tended to always work in kind of a 2D format, which I guess is ironic since I'm in architecture now. But I would just draw and draw and draw. And I, just pencils, crayons, colored pencils, watercolor, like that. It was always just kind of a 2D format for me. And so I just have tons of sketchbooks from when I was a kid. So that was kind of my media of choice.
When did architecture enter the scene for you?
Yeah, I always was, considered myself into the arts and creative, but I never thought about doing it professionally. Like STEM was not really a big thing when I was a kid. That wasn't like a thing yet. That was really kind of advertised, and women in STEM was not something that was like a big focus in school. So kind of in my limited mindset was like, well, if I like art and I want to do it professionally, I could be an artist. So I'm like, I don't know what's that? How does that make money? Because obviously there are artists that make money, but again, this is pre-internet and, limited child brain. So I was like, okay, so I like art, but I'll just pick a quote unquote, practical career. And because I've always been, really interested in like kind of social justice and, not like changing the world, but just, being involved, trying to make things better. I ended up in social work. And so my original plan for a career was, I've always been really interested in law, total nerd into law, just find that really fascinating, read cases for fun. I don't know why, I can't explain it. But so I was like, all right, so I'll go to law school and I'll do like, legal clinics or whatever. I'm like, that's my path. And I just got totally burned out in my social worker job. I was in my early 20s and was like, okay, so I need to go back to school. I need to change careers. And it was a really, it almost felt like a very impulsive decision. I can remember I was at a barbecue that my cousin was having, and I don't even remember what we were talking about, but just like a little lightning bolt was like architecture. I'm going to go back to school for architecture. And I just, when I got back from the barbecue, started looking at schools in Chicago and just applied. And here I am. It was like, I didn't really even look into like, what does an architect do? Like, what does this mean? What kind of schooling? Like, I just kind of went for it. And so it really doesn't feel like, I'm sure that it was informed by my path as a child and as a young adult, but it almost feels like this just impulsive decision. But here I am. I stuck with it. I graduated in 2010. And so I've been doing it for almost 15 years now. So clearly I made the right choice. But yeah, that's kind of my long and winding road.
That's pretty fascinating. Do you think that there are a lot of, well, I kind of already know that there are a lot of parallels with social work and architecture?
There definitely are, and I'm glad that you said that because it actually surprises people when I say that. Because I think a lot of people think of architects like the quote unquote starchitects, the one person that
Mm-hmm.
does the genius design that's completely uninhabitable. And that's like not really what architecture is. It really is like a team effort, and it is about like the end user. It's about like making spaces that work so well people don't even notice like how the space is working for them. They just intuitively can like move through it. So yeah, it really is, it's related to like society.
But I was curious about the parallel, like, because I don't see it. So
Yeah, can you dive into it?
can you tell me? Yeah.
Yeah, to me it's about creating something, in this case a building, that benefits other people. And social work is about really focusing on people in need. But it is, again, it's like, how do you kind of create these programs or enable people? Like, I'm not describing this very well. It like intuitively is related to me.
Pulling out how two things are related like this. So, when I think of the parallels between social work and architecture, I think a little bit more about just what it takes to get everyone to the same place, to get something
Yeah, that's
actually
a great point.
constructed.
Yeah.
In what I know of social work, having been around it a little bit, is that it is a lot of that kind of decision building, because you have to get your patient on board. If it's a patient situation, you have to get a patient on board, you have to get a family on board, you have to get a institution on board, an outside job company on board, right? You're coordinating all these different people and mindsets and a lot of different motivations.
I think you nailed it. That,
That's
yeah,
how I
there is a
look at
lot
it.
of there's a lot of, so I think that when you first asked the question, I was really focused on like the end goal, and that is part of it, because it is about like creating, like making something better for a group of people and not just one person's genius idea. Like, that's kind of where I was coming from. But you're absolutely right. Like, the process is important, and there's a lot of thinking outside of the box, and like, you go into a lot of projects with unknowns in architecture. And so it's not about like knowing everything the longer you're in the career. It's just about like knowing what your resources are to find answers. And it was the same in social work. There was a lot of like, every person is unique, right? And there's not always going to be a program or a solution that they fit into 100% that will work well for them. So it's about kind of marshaling those resources. And then don't want to use the expression herding cats, because I love cats and they're great, but it is a little bit like herding cats, like trying to get everybody on the same page and get all the ideas kind of woven together into a, end product or solution that works for everybody. So there's a lot of compromising. there shouldn't be ego in architecture, and there's definitely not ego in social work. And I think that's something that surprises people, because the famous architects tend to have enormous egos.
I mean, humans. It's very human.
Yeah.
You find big egos everywhere.
It's a lot of consensus building. That was the word I was looking for. It's a lot of consensus building in both fields, and navigating a lot of very egos and a lot of very delicate sensitive interpersonal things. Because if you're working in residential architecture, you've got people are actually going to live in your space, right?
Yeah.
And
you're
not going to live there
to their very specific needs.
But people cannot articulate what they actually need and how they actually live.
I was just going to provide an anecdote of kind of a fun way in which architecture really can be tailored to an individual. There was a house that I was working on where they had these two dogs. I think they were boxers, and they were very like, we want these guys to have windows at their height that they can look out. And I just remember one time we putting together elevations and we had this really low window, and we were like beastie vision enabled, because I think they called them their beasties. And so there can be like these really fun opportunities that are like not commonly found in houses, super low windows, but for these particular clients, that was perfect for them.
Yeah, and it's things like that people will value in their architecture more than they'll value anything that would be considered magazine worthy.
Yeah.
So what do you feel like has kept you in architecture? What really speaks about it to you?
I think I definitely like that it's a profession where I have so many opportunities to continue learning, because I am one of those people that just really geeks out on that. Like I always want to, I have never done that kind of project before, so that's what I want to do. Then there's always that, and there's so many different fields and specialties in architecture. So that really, it keeps me engaged. I don't feel like static. And just the idea of, in a way, creating this kind of life-size art that you can walk through, and not that it's necessarily something beautiful, but that it's like this thoughtful product, and it's been well designed, and it's safe for people, and hopefully has some environmental features, so it's not just some buildings, or we look at like the older ones that are not very resource friendly. So hopefully there's some thoughtfulness there, and it's like when it all is said and done, it's a tangible, this huge structure that you get to walk through. And it's I helped do this with this great team of people, and now everyone's hopefully going to use it and enjoy it, and hopefully we did a good job, and that it lasts for a while. It's really neat to see that. And a lot of projects, I don't know if people not in architecture realize this, but usually projects will go on for years, and so it's you're playing the long game. So it's not something where you get a lot of like quick rewards. So when it is all said and done and built, it really is very rewarding, because you worked very hard to get to that point.
Yeah.
So that's
cool.
Yeah. And then, and there is that chance to be creative, and maybe it's not in a necessarily way of creative beauty, but like creative and like, I hope that every time someone goes into this space, they really like this feature works really well for them. And like, that's great. If that's been achieved, then job well done.
Perfect.
What are the things that don't feel fulfilling in the field, or even just currently? I know you changed companies recently, and I want to talk about that too, but we'll talk about that next. But I want to talk about like remote working as an architect, and just kind of your
Are you working remote now?
I am. So my previous firm is based out of San Francisco. So being Washington State, I was fully remote for that. And now my new firm is in Chicago, and I'm fully remote for that, but there is a large travel component. So I will go back to the Chicago office, or I'll go to sites as needed. And I kind of feel like that's the way of the future, as much as I see a lot of, I guess, more traditional arc firms really pushing against that. I do feel like a lot more jobs will be not necessarily in the office full time. So there's definitely, we saw during the pandemic, it can be done. I think that's great. And it really allows people to also achieve more of that balance of other things. Like, for example, I'm in Washington for family reasons. And so I'm glad to have this job in Chicago, but I can't really move there right now. And so it's nice to have that opportunity. So I think that's the plus side of working remote. For me, the downside can be like the isolation, because I am kind of anchored to my desk here and I have my, you know, insane number of monitors and laptops and, you know, everything's all plugged in and I have this whole mess of cables and whatever. It's like I'm not really one of those professionals that can just take a laptop and go to a cafe, where you could kind of alleviate some of that social isolation. So I am kind of at my desk in my house from 9 to 5, so to speak. And so that can be like lonely sometimes. Even if I'm on the phone with people all day, it's not quite the same as like having that,
It's definitely not the
FaceTime
same.
interaction.
Yeah, it's definitely not the same.
But honestly, like just the pros of working remotely outweigh that. So I'm happy with my situation.
And a shameless plug for Jumping Bean that this is one of the reasons we exist. And
Yes.
we are online.
That's one of the reasons I joined.
Yeah, we are online, but we will have, and we have had some in-person touch points as well. So we want to keep people connected that are a little bit more isolated in their artistry or their creative worlds, because I think being a creative is an isolating thing in a lot of ways. And we can get into this into our discussion
Absolutely.
with personal style, right? Because in order to have a personal style, you kind of have to isolate and like kind of build a bubble so that you
Do like some real soul searching.
not really have a ton of outside influences. There gets a point where you have to create your own. So that can feel really lonely sometimes. What overall would you change about the industry of architecture? I'm really curious about your answer of this one.
The mindset of people need to be in an office together to be productive. I'd like to see that change. And I feel like it is changing. But, that's it's kind of like the newer, younger generation, not necessarily the older established firms. I think it's always improving, but unfortunately, there still is a lot of industry sexism. And, I think that there's more female architects, but there's still not necessarily female architects in leadership positions. And there's not as many women architects that end up getting licensed, and compared to men. And it's not just because women have families. I mean, there's a lot of factors that play into that. And the professional organization for my industry, the AIA, they've done studies for, I don't know, like 10 years now. And so they're kind of like tracking if this is changing, but it's a slow go. And so that gets really frustrating. And I've seen, improvements in positive sides, like the firm that I worked at in San Francisco. Shout out to Studio Maven. It's run by a woman. The staff is 99% women. It was a great experience, So there are those firms out there, but I also read an interesting tidbit from this study that AAA put out. A lot of people interviewed, like female architects, said they would go off and create their own firms because they didn't have the kind of growth and leadership opportunities at like the more established firms. And so that's why you do see so many like small women-led firms, because they didn't play the game. They went off and kind of did their own thing, made their own rules. So that's definitely an issue. And I don't think this is a problem, but it's just something that is a little curious to me. I don't really know how to resolve it, but not a lot of people really know like what an architect does day to day. And I guess there's a lot of professions like that, but I mean, hey, it'd be great if that was more well known or more well understood.
Recognized.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of fun because people are like, oh, like, so what exactly do you do? So I always get to like answer that question, but then it's like, well, why don't people know about that? Like it seems like there's an opportunity there, is I guess what I'm saying, more than like something I lament. So
there's a great book called How to Work with an Architect that's for the client side. And an old friend of mine would actually give this to his clients, like their first meeting. Like once a contract was signed,
That's
he would
great.
show up with this book, because there is so much that people just don't understand the roles and responsibilities, right? Of contractors versus architects versus subcontractors versus trades. Like all of those people play important roles, but sometimes the lines get blurred. So it was just really helpful to have that as a
Yeah.
pocket.
I'm curious from your perspective, like, what is one thing that you wish more people knew?
I think it would be nice if people understood the vast amount of training and kind of knowledge that you are expected to have that goes into it. And a lot of the times I will hear from people like, I don't understand why architects are so expensive. I can go to Home Depot and do it myself. And it's like there's cases where that's true, but there's also, there's a balancing act of knowing a lot of different codes, which I don't know if either of you have ever had the fun opportunity to dive into code, but I mean, it is convoluted and, and there's not just one code, right? There's many different organizations and so you have to make sure that whatever you think of is meeting all of the expectations from these different organizations and codes. The amount of training that kind of goes into it, I think a lot of people don't understand that to get licensed, you take multiple exams, not just one. They keep kind of reforming that process. It used to be 9 when I did it; it was 7. Now I think it's down to 5. That's a lot of studying, and I took I think about 2 years to get through mine because I really wanted to take time and study for each one. On top of that, you also have about 5 years worth of internship hours, and that is required. And so it really is like there is a lot of training that goes into it, and it is a kind of an expertise and a specialty. And I don't know that people necessarily know that or appreciate that, so they kind of treat it like something that's just an overblown expense. And it's like, well, we really are here, like, and we've studied and we've trained to, there's a reason why.
My question to you, because this is an unpopular opinion, but I believe strongly that architects should be charging more. And I think that
and I think a lot of architects agree with you.
I think that the perception is inaccurate around training and experience and qualifications, not just because people think that they can do it themselves, because they do, but also because architects don't charge enough. I mean, if lawyers charge what architects charge, people would think they could do that themselves too.
Yeah, and it's hard because then you get into like the circular, well, the ones that do charge more don't get the jobs because it's not valued. So it's like it just ends up and that's always a big discussion too.
It's not totally my experience, though,
show that your fees are justified.
There are, and I don't know how much you encounter this with the type of architecture that you've done, but with when I was working in interiors and architecture adjacent and as an owner's rep, a lot of the time these exhibit companies, these event companies would actually get the architect role, whether they knew code or not. And we would have lots of discussions about these companies needing to follow code in permanent installations. But they would get the job over architects and they'd charge 3 to 5 times more because they could move faster and because there was more respect for people charging more. To be honest, like, it's just a fascinating.
And they probably could move faster, because they didn't have all the red tape.
Right. If you're not following code, you don't have a lot. You don't have a lot of red tape. But there are ways. Profession kind of gets in its own way with, hey, these are the ways we've done it for hundreds of years, and people are like, we don't care. We just want it done yesterday. And it is kind of who's willing to put in the time for that training and for that rigorous schooling and for that testing. That is a totally different mindset than some of these other companies out there, right? So it's like there needs to be a little bit of a merger there to say, hey, we have all this experience and we're going to charge for it, and we're going to do what we can to, speed the process or whatever, right? But I just think that there's a lack of respect for the profession, partly because it's such a sacrificial profession.
Yeah, there's also a component to that, in that, for all the studying and training we do, like, business classes were not part of that at all. And that's like, how are you expected to be? And I guess that's probably true with a lot of professional training, but I I think that that's something that definitely could be integrated into not just the when you're in school, but also like your continuing professional education, like integrating that business side, and how do you promote your skills and have people see value in what you do, and also successfully run your business. And there's I think a lot of people also don't realize, like, as expensive as architecture fees can be, there's a lot of work that goes unbilled because you are trying to, keep within your budget that you propose to the client. And so, you know, I'll work 50 hours a week and I'll put 40 on my timesheet or what have you. Like, it's just, that is not uncommon.
And that is a mindset of architecture that does not exist in things
Yeah.
like healthcare or in
Like,
law.
can you imagine a lawyer doing
Never.
that? Yeah.
They bill for 10 minutes, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
yeah. And there
But
is
then,
just that
it's
mindset
like,
that's drilled in. And we talked about this in another podcast, actually, because I love going on these rants about architecture because I was in it, like in the field, in the industry. I'm not an architect. But the other thing we talked about was just that mindset gets drilled into you in college because you were putting in so many hours above and beyond what you're getting credit for, that you're already in this sacrificial mindset.
Yeah.
And then you get out in the
Yeah,
field and everybody is just like scrambling to, martyr themselves into higher positions, right? And then you're not billing for all your hours. And
yeah,
then,
and it's not,
it just snowballs from there.
and I don't think it's something that is known or that you intentionally, go. Like, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Also ties back to how you succeed in a company. If you're an employee, not an employer, it's like, if you don't lose money on jobs, that's better for the company. And, so then that is kind of tied into how well you do professionally. And yeah, it's always a tightrope balancing act.
It's a slippery slope, but it doesn't exist in parallel professions, which I think is just really fascinating.
So what you're saying is I should have gone to law school.
Like, literally, that was your choice point, right?
I know.
Like, lawyer, or you chose the sacrificial path.
I said it's maybe not as sacrificial as social work.
It's
Also true. You took a step.
Yeah.
Step up.
I just want to, because we're going to go into our discussion, but I just want to thank you for sharing your experience and your journey. Is there anything else you want to share with us about your creative interests or your career right now, or kind of where you're going? I know those are three separate, but you can choose your own adventure.
And I loved those books so much as a kid. Speaking of creative influence, that's a good one. I would say overall, like, not to be, down on my profession. Like, I do genuinely enjoy what I do, and I am able to, pay my rent and have two wonderful kitties, and, like, I'm doing good. So it's not all struggle and terrible. And I do genuinely enjoy, like, the creative process. And as for what's next, I don't know. I just want to continue to try and do new kinds of projects. I want to try all of the architecture. So we'll see how that works out for me.
That is what's so exciting about architecture. Like, I have such dreams of like, I just want to design a pool bar. That's on my list. I really want to do like a really crazy pool bar.
Sounds really
I don't know
fun.
when, I don't know how, but like that's on my design dream list. And I feel like I love architecture. I love architects. Like, I get along with architects and designers, and we can talk shop all day long. And I just get so impassioned about how architects are treated and how valuable their knowledge is, and how critical they are to our society. And they really are a very unsung hero in our society, because we do look at the healthcare worker. Obviously we need healthcare workers. Like I'm not, calling them out, but looking at the people who are like really paid and really revered. And architects are kind of like teachers in this way, where it's like, they're kind of quietly doing their thing and they're so needed by society, and they do not get the respect and the admiration that they deserve and that they've earned. Props to you for continuing to do this work.
It's very kind of you to say. I don't usually hear this kind of enthusiastic pro architecture. I think I'm used to hearing other things. So this is great. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel very passionate about it. Because people who stick with it love it. And people really, don't do it for the money because you can't. It's kind of like being a chef. There are a few star chefs that are household names and get TV shows and, whatever. But architects, like, you could build the whole building with your bare hands and they will put somebody else's name on it. So, like, it is just a very non-credited field, and I appreciate it. So I'll get off that track now.
No, it's great. That's awesome to hear. It's so not a perspective I'm used to hearing from people. I love it. I didn't know there was people that felt like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so development of style. This is an interesting one. I was a little bit struggling with this myself, but I want to start it off by just saying, like, artistic style is not fixed. And I think that we really think of it as fixed because we see an artist and we go, that's their style. And we try to put them in that box. And this goes across the board of, like, you direct films, you want that film to be like this. You are a musician, your music should sound like this. You put out a country album and you've been a pop star, like, absolutely not. Right. But as a creative from the inside, like, you don't want to just land on one thing and be that one thing for your entire life. And some people do it.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like death.
It sounds like death to me too. But if you're doing that, and some people maybe are completely fulfilled, and this is a discussion topic, can you stay completely fulfilled staying in one medium? Or, let's say that you are a cartoon artist and you always draw the same characters. And I think of, like, the Oatmeal, right? Like, that guy's been at it with his same characters, his same style for, like, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years? I have no idea. I'd have to look it up. He's been at it, right? Does he have other things that he does? Probably. But we all know.
I hope so, for his sake.
I hope so too. But we all look at him as, like, this is this guy's style, right? He has done this for so long. Is he fulfilled by that? Or has it now just become a commercial enterprise that pays the bills and he feels like he has to continue within that same? We'd have to ask him. Maybe we'll have him on someday. But I just, for the discussion.
Next
No,
guest.
but honestly, though, like, I think about doing that, right? Where I'm, like, creating the same thing over and over and over again. And I just because I also think too, like, the nature of creativity is play and experimentation and trying new things and, like, constantly. I mean, this is what I really resonated with Meredith about, was, like, the constant learning.
Yes.
Like, I just feel like creativity demands that, right? Where it's like you could master something and then all of a sudden you would be like, okay, what's next? Like, there's like, and so, like, I can't imagine being fulfilled by, like, having a style and then just sticking with it forever. Like, there's just, there are things that are constant in my world, right? Where it's like, okay, these are the foundations of who I am and why I create and what I like to create and what I naturally gravitate towards. So there are, steady things, but the way that gets expressed changes all the time, right? Like, nature changes all the time, whether or not we see it. And so I just can't imagine. I mean, there are things about the way I create and what I create that I do really love and, like, sometimes get attached to. But ultimately I'm like, what about this? What if I tried this? And, like, that's what fulfills me and sustains me, right? Like, that relationship to it that is open and curious and playful and like, what does this button do?
Yeah.
You know? So, but then, that requires constantly kind of being a beginner or like being willing to not be good at something. I think this is what we talked in the last another podcast was like, you have to be willing to look like an idiot, and
Yeah.
like not create something amazing, but
Speaking of just switching jobs and doing an entirely new kind of architecture, that's definitely where I am right now. Yeah.
Meredith, I'm
Yeah.
curious.
No, I really like
Because
that.
I think architecture is one of these fields where it's actually really hard to develop your own style because it is so client driven and the money just isn't there for you to
Yeah.
do your own projects all the time, right? If ever. Like the architect's dream
Yeah.
is to do one of their own projects and build it from the ground.
Yeah, I guess that's why everybody is like, oh, I'm going to do my own house. This is all making me feel so much better because it is something that I struggled with, just, that voice of doubt as you're like laying in bed at night. And it's like, well, what if am I bad at my profession because I don't have like a signature design? And what is my style? And it's like, well, I really don't. And it really doesn't come down to style and what I do. It comes down to every project's unique and it's all about what works best for the people who are actually using the building, not necessarily what I think is pretty. I mean, sometimes you can kind of have those nice, graceful, touches to your design, but yeah, it really doesn't. I don't feel like I have a style, and I kind of was approaching it like, is that like a professional failure on my part? But I like this positive mindset.
Well, I
And
just think that
this
there's only
reframing
a
of
few
it.
people that get to have their own style in architecture. I've seen
Yeah,
some firms be able to create their own style and get hired for that style. But I think that's
right.
pretty rare. It's not the norm. It's not the bread and butter architecture firms are not able to do that because you can't
It's
really
definitely
choose your
not.
clients. There's too much competition.
But I like that. I like that thread too, though, of like every project is unique, right? Like when you're working with people, that's just what it's going to be.
Mhm.
Like I have, like I have a kind of style in terms of what I gravitate towards and what I value, right? But then like it's still going to look different based on who I'm photographing, who I'm painting for. Like anytime you work with people, like there is going to be an element of, okay, this isn't about me.
Mhm.
So how can I adjust and adapt to who I'm creating for, regardless of what the medium is? Even in my painting, okay, first I was painting to honor my pain and like learn to express it. And then it's actually my connection with God. So I'm like, okay, what do you want me to create? Right? It's like, so became a different relationship. But then, okay, what do I like in photography? It's like, I like the realness. I love emotion. I love nature. And so like, there's those components. But then it's like, who I'm photographing is very different. Maybe this person has a lot of anger. This person needs to break out of their shell in this particular way. This one is like, so there are things that constantly require adjustment and adaptation to be in connection with the thing or the person, right? And so like I also just think that's the nature of humanity, right? Is like everyone has their uniqueness, their preferences, their particular traumas, like so
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like creativity is being in relationship with life and with humanity and like
And
how you navigate that, right?
that might be more part of being creative. It's not really what people would think, in that you have a particular style. It's that like resiliency and adaptability. That's the creative part, is the constant change.
And there are people who are so in their style
I
that
think so.
don't ever get recognized for having a style. I mean, you look at people like Basquiat or Van Gogh or people that are like really well known now that didn't get any recognition when they were alive. And then they had somebody who were,
Yeah.
promoting them after the fact and like they were really prolific in that particular style. So then it attracts enough people who say, I love that style. And like ideally we could all do that. We could all like be housed and clothed and fed and be in our own bubble creating from this deep place, right? Where we get to experiment to a point where like you express your personal essence through art in a way that is attracted, other people are attracted to you, right? Like you become the flame, not the moth. And that would be my ideal, right? Is that, then you don't feel like you're doing anything for commercial. I wrote that down for notes for the show. Like commercial viability is its own influence. And it's too bad in a way. Like capitalism strikes again. That like
I know capitalism ruins everything.
that we are so geared towards that. I mean, I remember as a child people saying like, "Oh, you have this skill, so that's a commercially viable skill." Or that's a commercially viable talent that you can make money from. And if it's not commercially viable, then I guess it's a hobby and you really shouldn't spend that much.
Yeah, like it's a passion project, not like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like for me that the idea kind of like of being, creating things or being in your own bubble and not really trying to make a living off of it. That's what I really appreciate about the idea of video games, because you're really not constricted by those real life, budgets and codes. And I mean, obviously you are when you're creating a video game, but like whatever you design in that particular level is like it can be literally whatever you want it to be. It's not constricted by gravity or what have you. And so that's maybe I should have been a video game designer instead, but for me that's kind of like my
That's your
escape and my
outlet.
little creative
Yeah.
outlet is
I was going to ask you, it was on my list to ask you about that too, because it did sound when we talked prior about your kind of what you would do if you had just all the time and didn't have to pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
money.
You'd be in
Yeah.
in these video game worlds and creating worlds within video games.
Yeah, and there's ways to do that like on your own time, and you can look into modding video games, and I have kind of dabbled in it and have cyclical levels of energy that I can throw at that, and other times it's like I can't. I just need to be spoon fed something for the evening, so I'm not that great at like following through on it. But yeah, it's kind of, I don't know if I'll ever merge that into my professional life. I have managed to find some consulting gigs on the side to do like level design. But yeah, for now it tends to stay out of the sphere of kind of my actual paycheck.
And maybe that's okay. I think people need to have permission to have things that aren't commercially viable, that are creative outlets, right? And sometimes,
Yeah, like it's just for you.
yeah, if
Yeah.
we turn things into a thing that then has to make us money, the juice gets bled out of it, really. A lot of the time. I mean, not for everybody and not all the time, but
Yeah.
I think that can be true a lot of the time. Do either of you have any other things you want to add about personal style development? I think something just came to me. So what I want to kind of offer people with this is the permission to not have one, the permission to build several different personal styles, depending on medium, depending on mood, depending on day, right? And also to really dig into dream states, like really ideal states. Of Heather and I have worked with a guide who is very good at talking about frequencies. So talking about like, your essence is like a radio station frequency. And you can kind of look at everything around you as part of what you've curated within your frequency. And sometimes things don't fit, right? You look around and you're like, why do I live here? Or why do I have this job? Or why do I have this cat? Or whatever, right? And you're like this thing.
Never always know why I have
Always
the cat.
more cat. But like, what is the thing that doesn't vibe, right? Like if it's a musical note, what is that like wrong note that's happening? And one of the best ways I've found to like work with kind of building like what is my personal frequency is just to do like visual boards like we used to do as kids, right? Like my 2-year-old daughter loves to do collages, and she will just pick like it's the cutest thing ever. She'll be like, I like that airplane, I like that cracker advertisement, I like that, that kid face. I like, and she comes up with these things that are like, this is kind of your frequency. She's 2. And
Yeah. And she's not constrained by what it should be. She just knows what she likes.
Right. She's just like, that's cool. That's a big airplane.
Well, I think actually that's something I would love to add to this is like the willingness to follow each interest, attraction, unknown thing, even when it doesn't make sense. Because at some point it actually will make sense. Like, I mean, for example, it's like, okay, I was super interested in painting. And so I dove into that. And then all of a sudden I was like, let's try photography. And then I went into that. And then, oh, let's try like this personal work, and like, ooh, I really like that. And I didn't really see how it connected until like 6 years later.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people are like, but that doesn't make sense, right? For what I'm already doing. Like, and that's where I think the willingness to explore is really important because, it may not make sense to anyone, including you, but it's like, okay, but there's something here for me and I don't know exactly why or what it is yet. But if you follow it enough and long enough, you get it.
Yes.
And then it might come all together later. It might not, but it's that willingness to explore and not know that a lot of people have a hard time with, right? It's like maybe because it has to be commercial and has to make money, or because there's a limit on like identity. There are a million reasons why we stop. But I think that is something that's really crucial is the courage to follow something until you get what it is for you. And that's, I think, where it gets lonely too, is like, I don't know why, but I got to do it. Right. Or like some people might be like, what are you doing? That's fucking dangerous. Or like, oh my God, like, who are you? I don't know you anymore. Right. And it's the courage to be like, I got to do this. And I might be alone for a while I'm doing it. I was. Right. And we are. But that's where you find the thing that's just meant for you. Right. It's like that was yours to discover. That was your hero's journey to go on. That was your lesson to learn. That was your particular thing, your nugget of wisdom, your piece of gold to bring to the world. Like, and that's where I think a lot of people get lost.
Yeah. Or never start.
Really.
Right.
Or never start.
Beginnings podcast. Like there's so many barriers to starting. So for you to, make the leap from social work to architecture, like having to begin again
Exactly.
in a completely different field and not seeing the threads probably from the beginning, like that takes a lot of courage and that takes a lot of
right. Like that lightning bolt, like you could have totally ignored that, right? You'd have been like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, that's not what I've devoted my life to. Right. But like, can you imagine not following that and like being where you are? Yeah.
It's a great point. And I think it's easy to see like when it's not you going through it, like, cause I always look at other people and I'm like, but whatever you don't like about yourself that you think is different or doesn't fit in, like to me, that's what makes you interesting. And I think that's like the overall theme, but it's hard when you're looking at yourself that way.
Totally. And I think our culture is also really, really into this idea of groupthink, right? It's like everyone's got to think the same, everyone's got to express the same, have the same values, or something's wrong. And that is a key of individuation, is being willing to leave what you know and discover something totally different.
I wrote a piece on this several years ago now, but just talking about the need for continuity or for consistency is a trauma response. So if you are really expecting someone to stay the same for you, or even an artist to not explore a new medium, or right, like I liked you the way you were, like that's actually your own trauma response, that you can't be fluid enough to see people as multidimensional. and that you need that kind of consistency from somebody.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah.
Amen.
Okay. I think we have reached a stopping point. I think we could also talk on this topic for a lot longer.
Yeah.
Did you wanna
Yes. So I want to talk a little bit about how to get involved with Jumping Bean. So as a member, you can get involved by going to our website, jumpingbeanmagiccollective.com. We never have to compete for domain names. And we are $20 a month to be a member. And you can see all of our members and all of their great skills and disciplines on our website and go learn more about them. And other ways that you can get involved with Jumping Bean are to hire the Jumping Bean Magic Collective to do work on your project. And your project could be any gamut of things. Could be illustrating a children's book. It could be branding your retail store. It could be building out your retail store. It could be designing your wedding. It could be just brainstorming with us about a new business. So we can pull together all kinds of creatives and at a very affordable rate have workshops and consultations that get you lots of disciplines in the same room. Same Zoom room. And another way to get involved with Jumping Bean is just to follow us and watch us grow. We're on Instagram and Threads. And then follow our podcast, and we will come to you with lots of creative guests and inspiration and topics of discussion. And we'd love to hear from you. At some point, we will be doing Q&A on this podcast with me and Heather and offering some short coaching sessions about your creative journeys.
Hell yeah.
I just wanted to say this was really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your courage to do something new and different.
Very new, yes.
Be uncomfortable while you were sharing, you know, like,
and Meredith,
I appreciate that.
Yes, I appreciate you coming on. I know this is very new, and we're excited to be your first podcast that you are on. Please let people know how to contact you if they would like to learn more about your architecture practice or your gaming.
There you go.
I think the thing that I keep most up to date is LinkedIn. Have an account with Upwork, and that's actually where people have gotten in touch with me for level design for video games.
Yep.
If you have your Upwork link, we will link that in the
Okay.
in the
yeah, well, you can find me at Jumping Bean. I know I filled out that profile.
All right, ladies, thank you so much. This was so much fun, and we
Thank you.
See everyone
thank you.
on the next one.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you are looking for more information about the Jumping Bean Magic Collective, please visit us at our website, www.jumpingbeanmagiccollective.com. There, you can become a member, reach out with questions, or become a design client. You may also find us on Instagram and Threads. If you enjoyed listening, please rate the show. See you next time.